Ủa mấy giờ rồi?
10 giờ rưỡi.
10 rưỡi à?
Dạ. Okay. Well, I mean, it's 10:30, so I'm going to start my lecture on Buddhism. Ongoing lecture, and thank you for those who have showed up for today. So last week I had a lecture about like what makes a good Buddhist, right? Because now I ask my father to make an announcement really quickly about the side conversation because it's actually helpful. Bộ ba nói
quý vị nói nhỏ nhỏ, đừng có ồn nào để cho người con thuyết pháp.
Right. Thank you. Okay, so last week I had a lecture about like what makes a good Buddhist, and then we went through like all the ideas, and then the important idea, just to summarize exactly like what makes a good Buddhist, is like, I had a list of like 8 points that I was talking about of like what makes like a good Buddhist, right? And so, if I had to summarize like the primary idea about like what makes a good Buddhist, I think one of the major points about Buddhism, and then we'll revisit it today, is that like somebody who's an actual good Buddhist, well, the religion itself emphasizes actual practice. It's not like you can just believe in Buddhism and then be successful. You have to actually apply the teachings in your real life. So that's the first idea about Buddhism, right? And the second idea is that, it's saying how with any religion, right? A lot of religions in general just offer this like ultimate truth about life, right? Part of the Buddhist tradition actually tells you, like, challenge everything that you hear, especially from somebody who has a claim to authority, somebody who sits in this seat, like giving lectures and stuff like that. Challenge everything that you hear, because that's the basis of like what it means to be a good Buddha. And it has 2 effects, right? You either lose your faith or it strengthens your faith, right? And so that's basically the points that I was speaking about last week. What makes a good Buddhist? So I want to dive into like 2 points that it's of interest for potentially some of you guys. Okay. So first, like you guys are in a temple, and you notice like that here's an example in front of you, somebody who has their hands clasped together and they are worshiping, right? Like you guys see it, that like all these people come in, right? They stand in front of the Buddha and they are worshiping, right? And so my question is, like, do you guys even understand what that process is? Like, what are they actually doing, right? And so let me read to you the definition of what worshiping is, and then I'll explain to you what like the Buddhist interpretation is, right? So according to this, to worship is an expression of reverence to deities or supernatural beings who the worshipper believes are capable of preventing misfortunes and danger or granting certain blessings. So, you guys ever like when you guys are praying, especially like praying to God, or like with different religions or whatever, they're praying to God, like it's a form of worshiping, right? And what's the outcome? What's the expected outcome? Well, it's because they hope to avoid misfortune and they hope to get granted a blessing. But in Buddhism, especially, I feel like the definition itself has been misconstrued along the way, because a lot of the times people clasp their hand and they bow and they kowtow, and it's in the hopes of gaining like a certain blessing. But really in Buddhism, like it actually has a different meaning, and to some extent that meaning has been lost. The people who actually study Buddhism understand like why people do this, why do they bow their heads and stuff like that, and I just wanted to explain that very quickly. It's the expression of love and respect of the triple gem. And so, I don't know, like for those who have been listening to the lecture, like they understand what the triple gem is, but I'll quickly explain what the triple gem is. Triple gem is like basically a source and origin of the Buddhist teaching, right? So the first of the triple gem is the Buddha, right? Because he basically realized like a certain truth about the world, and so he's considered one of the triple gems. Now, the second piece of the triple gem is the Dharma, which is basically the teaching of the Buddha. And then the last of the triple gem is called the Sangha, which is the disciplines, the disciples who spread his message, right? And if you think about the triple gem, like if you have one missing out of the three, like this religion doesn't function necessarily. Like how can you have Buddhism with just a Dharma and the teaching and the people who spread the thing without the actual founder? How can you have the founder and the disciples without like carrying on his original message, right? Which is the Dharma. And how can you have like the teacher and his teachings but without anybody to spread the message, right? So the idea of the triple gem is like, what makes up this religion? It's the three things. You have the founder who actually figured out, who to some extent achieved enlightenment because he realized like to himself like the ultimate truth. And then he had basically his teaching like over the span of like 50 years, he taught the message and like everything that all the knowledge that he had, and then he basically had like disciples just like teaching it from years on. And keep in mind that this is a very old religion. It's 2,500 years old, right? And so it's been able to maintain itself throughout the years due to the Sangha, the people who are just talking and thinking about this religion, right? And so what is it that people do when they are worshiping? The idea is it's really about when we pray, and there's a misconstruction about like what happens when people do, like when they bow their head. Really, it's to pay honor and respect to the Buddha, the Sangha, and the Dharma. It's basically saying this. It's like saying, I'm giving gratitude to the person who's founded Buddhism, right? And giving gratitude to this idea that like, because of them, or because of like the past, I'm able to walk down a specific path in life where I'm able to realize like self-enlightenment, or enlightenment myself, right? And ultimately the idea of Buddhism is that like the seed of enlightenment is within all of us. And that like, if we apply ourselves, we're able to achieve that same level of just realizing like the meaning of life, the ultimate truth, etc., right? But then again, keep in mind that the key idea of Buddhism, one of the tenets, is to challenge exactly what people are telling you. So don't just listen to me, think about it, and then like see if you can challenge it, okay? So yeah, the idea is that like we're looking to the Buddha as an example of wisdom and enlightenment, right? And then ultimately, like throughout this entire process of like learning about Buddhism and becoming a Buddhist, it's really about striving towards that model. Like how can you achieve that level of Zen, that level of peace, that level of enlightenment, right? And so when we bow our heads and when we worship, don't misconstrue it as something like, oh my gosh, it's like they make us do whatever. It's really out of a sense of gratitude that you actually bow your head, right? Just like if you like respect your parents or something, you would bow or if you respect elders, you'll bow your head to elders. You'll bow your head to parents, and to the Buddha, it's no different, okay? And like for the people who like come in and they like put their hands together and they hope for good deeds to come their way or good blessings to come their way, that's actually the opposite of what the Buddha teaches, right? Because the Buddha teaches in karma. So if you want blessings to come your way, you have to be putting in the good deeds yourself first, right? You can't just be like an evil person or whatever. Like let's just say you're stealing, robbing, and doing bad stuff and bullying other people, and then expect like a windfall of like good deeds to come your way. It doesn't work that way. Or especially like, and it's funny. Yeah, like the philosophy of religion itself really truly asks you like to conduct yourselves accordingly, right? And so, you know, if you are a good-natured person and you do good things, then blessings come towards you, right? And that's part of the law of karma, which is like really like a strong thing in Buddhism. Strong tenet in Buddhism. Okay, so that was like from last week's lecture that I wanted to add on, but I didn't have a chance. So this lecture is actually particularly just very much so the same idea, but it's titled, Why Do We Study Buddhism to Begin With? Okay? So first I just explained about like why do we worship, and why do we worship in the way that we do, just like, you know, clasping our hands together and bowing our heads. Like, so now the big question is like, why Buddhism to begin with? It's very interesting. I think I have like a list of like all these things about like why Buddhism to begin with, right? And so the first thing is the idea that like if you study Buddhism and if you consider yourself a Buddhist, it becomes part of your identity, right? And so this in itself is a good reason for you to begin studying Buddhism, right? Or like for the ones who are already Buddhists, right? Like in this room, whether you consider yourself Buddhist or not, keep in mind that religion is like a big part of your life. Like not any religion, not just necessarily Buddhism, but for many people, religion is part of their life, right? And so religion adds into part of your identity. So that's like a good reason like to begin studying Buddhism to begin with. That's A. B, if you think carefully about like the idea of Buddhism and like how like karma is such a central tenet in Buddhism, it really, the main push of Buddhism is for you to strive to be your better self. Ultimately, it's like strive to be your better self. And why not like partake or why not study a religion that actually pushes you to strive to be your best self, right? So that's like the first reason why we study Buddhism. Second reason, according to the text I'm reading, is that it's an important source of like world civilization. It's had influence, like if you think about this is like one of the major religions that occurred even before before Christianity. And in fact, Christianity had a lot of influence from Buddhism because it happened like 2,500 years in the past, right? So if we're living in 2019 and basically, according to the calendar, that means that Christ only came out around like about 2,000 years ago and not necessarily 2,500 years ago. So Buddhism itself is a very old religion, which is really amazing. Like, and I want to dive into like why like that the age itself is so amazing, at least to me. So first, it's influenced like civilization, like old civilization, up to this point today, and it's still like alive and well. So that's like very interesting. But if one of the central tenets of Buddhism is to like question, to challenge, like what you see, what you hear about it. My question is, and this is fascinating to me, how is it that like a religion founded upon this idea for you to question everything, how can it last so long? Up to 2,500 years, how does it last even into modern society? Does that make sense? That tells me that the structure and the core of the teaching has to be so strong and fundamentally true for it to like last so long. So yeah, so it's like fascinating that after thousands of years, like the philosophers, the scientists, the deep thinkers, they still gravitate towards like the truth around Buddhism. So there's something about it, something about the teaching that you have to think like, oh wow, how is it possible that it could last too long? Like because eventually, like certain things get debunked, right? They like people realize, oh wait, that can't be true, right? But not none of the tenets of Buddhism. What's another fascinating thing is, and I just thought about this. This is like off of the text, but have any of you guys read Shakespeare? Shakespeare? No? Shakespeare? It's like classic text, right? If you've read like old classic literature, the language is very limited. Like English back then was very limited, and Shakespeare lived at around like 1200s or something. So that was like maybe just 1,000 years ago. So my question is, 2,500 years ago, when language was not nearly as evolved as it could be, how is it that somebody can be able to have the correct language and capacity to name certain things that are still true today? That I don't know. For me, coming from a language perspective, that's fascinating. Like you have very limited resources or very limited words, and yet you're able to string together those words to speak about the truth or the nature of reality, right? And then we have scientists today, physicists, who still think about these things like the nature of reality, and none of it contradicts any Buddhist doctrines. So that's really fascinating. And it's like this this actually tells me, it's like, man, we should actually dive deeper into learning about Buddhism, because how is it possible that even with limited language, the description about the nature of how we live, of like life in general, still fits? I don't know, it's just very mind-blowing. Okay, so that's like the second piece about like why we should study Buddhism. Third piece is also quite fascinating. It's this idea that we are no different from animals. And if you think deeply, deeply down, it's true. Because what is it that we all need, right? The three basic needs: food, shelter, and rest, right? What is it that animals need? Food, shelter, and rest. So, or like protection and care. So, what's the distinction between like man or men in society and then animals? Well, it's our capacity to like think about more than just the physical, right? Like our brains can function in a different way, and so I think like for me, it's and according to this text, it's like we study Buddhism so that we can rise above like simple animal instincts, right? And for us to really like, most humans, or like throughout, I'm sure throughout human history, it's like a lot of people have been searching for like the meaning of life and stuff like that, right? And so like this is one reason, not just to simply study Buddhism, but to study like religion in general, right? You do need to some extent like to search spiritually for satisfaction. And so yeah, and then I brought this example up before in a previous lecture. It's like a would you rather question. Like, would you rather go through 100 years of life just doing the basic things, like the physical stuff in life, without actually ever discussing or thinking about religion? Or would you go through 1 year of life, but really deeply digging into like everything that, like all the spiritual ideas, and like searching for meaning, right? And to me, it seems like the choice is very obvious, right? Like, why not? Like, because, and I'm sure if you ever like have a close eye, look, like walk out into the street and look at people, and ask yourself, it's like, are they just going through the motions of just living? Or are they like making an active attempt to really understand life, right? And it's like funny because it's like, you know, I'm thinking back to like this song from like Drake and Nicki Minaj where they're like, you know, it's a moment for life where she says, to live doesn't mean you're alive. And it's true, right? Like, and then, I forgot what Drake said, but something close to the same line. It's like, yeah, to live doesn't mean you're alive. And so if you live like many years without actually exploring deeply like religion or even like, and in this case Buddhism, like there's no point in living, right? And so yeah, this is how like we rise above like the animal instincts. Okay, so down to three more ideas about like why. So during the time of the Buddha, well, the point that this is saying is that Buddhism constitutes the most scientific and practical teachings, and it's the number one reason why a lot of like knowledgeable people tend to turn towards Buddhism and not towards like any other religion, right? And so it's when I was reading into the history of like obviously like if you like read into like how the Buddha like achieved enlightenment and like how he spread the religion during that time, it's really fascinating because the Buddha is from India. Okay, he's not like, well, I guess you could call it like South Asia, but he's from India. And during that time, Hinduism, well, I'm not going to name other religions, but there were different religions. And if within that subcontinent, within that space, they believed in certain things like the caste system. They believed in certain things like human sacrifices, animal sacrifices. And it's like, how brave must you have been, and I'm referring to the Buddha, to stand up and say, no, all of these teachings of this region is completely wrong. Like, and that's why it's so part of the tradition of Buddhism to challenge things that you hear and see. Because, you know, like people can be superstitious, right? And so they said, oh my gosh, like you can't do this, like it's defying the gods or something. Like no, we have to sacrifice, we have to do self-mortification. Or like if you're born in a certain caste, and even up to today, like certain people still believe in this idea that if you're born in a certain caste, you can't move from it. So when Buddha founded this religion, he said no, like none of this is true, you know? And so he was able to challenge he denounced like all those systems, all those religions that was occurring at the time. And basically, he fought hard against those like vicious practices, right? And so it's like, I mean, that's like, it's feeding into this idea of like, why should we study Buddhism, right? For him to challenge like the idea, but think about it, like to what extent is it fair? And if you think about other religions, to say like, oh, if you're born in a certain caste system, like you stay there for life. So if you were born in a high caste, that means, you know, you're automatically like granted all these blessings and stuff. But if you're born in a low caste, you're granted nothing. Like that's not fair. Whereas within the idea of the Buddhism, or within the idea of Buddhism itself, it's like you make your own destiny. Like, because karma is such a strong idea, it's like it doesn't matter where you're born, as long as you do good deeds and you strive towards being a very good person, you're able to rise or fall based on your karma. Like, that sounds a lot more fair than this idea that, like, no, your family's this, you were born into this, and that's it for you, right? And I don't know, I think it's fascinating that at that time, and the Buddha, mind you, was a prince, right? He stands to rule a kingdom. And so he was part of that society, but for him to like peel back and say, wait a minute, there's something inherently unfair in this idea that's just like mind-blowing. Like for somebody thousands of years ago to say like, wait a minute, this is all wrong, okay? So that's like another I don't know if you guys noticed, today the temple's like very crowded, right? Because today it's like honoring the goddess of mercy, or she's a bodhisattva. Her name is Kuan Yin, or at least the Chinese version. In Vietnamese, it's like Kuan Yin Buddha, and it's like, how many religions do you guys know that puts a woman in the forefront? Just think carefully about that. And this is coming off of the monk's lecture last week. Like, there's still certain religions that don't allow women to enter the temple or the place of worship, right? And here we have like the Buddha, and then right underneath the Buddha, you have the statue of the goddess of mercy. And if you go in the back garden or whatever, you have a giant statue of the goddess of mercy. But notice how like the paradigm of like, oh, men are superior gets challenged within the idea of Buddhism. It's like, no, anybody can achieve enlightenment. Anybody can become the best human being. You don't need to be a male to achieve that level. Like, my question is like, how many, I just don't want to talk about like other religions because that's not the point. The point is really to say like, oh, this is actually like it's been so on the forefront of like this idea that it's not about who you are, it's really about what you do with your life and how you can like strive towards like a better life. And I don't know, that's like a fascinating reason why like Buddhism to me like speaks to me, okay? And 5 more minutes. So, down to the last 2 things about like why study Buddhism, right? So, first thing is this. It says like Buddhist teaching, it's not esoteric. And the word esoteric means it's like, it only belongs to intellectuals, okay? Like that's actually false. And to some extent, there's certain like, I guess, other things or other religions where it's like, oh, you gotta be like an academic, etc. No. The idea of Buddhism is to give you like practical advice about how to live your life. Like you don't have to simply be a monk meditating all day to achieve enlightenment, right? And so like the religion itself is really like meant to be applied in your everyday life. But the point is also like, don't just listen, don't just like learn about Buddhism, apply everything that you learn about, right? And then it gives you like very practical advice. Like for example, one practical advice that the Buddhist said, like even in his like final word before he died, was that depend on yourself. And it's true, right? Because no one can actually achieve salvation for you. You can only achieve like this idea of salvation to yourself. You can only achieve enlightenment for yourself. Very much like nobody can eat the food for you, and nobody can help you. And it's funny because the monk always uses this example. Nobody actually ever helps you take a dump. But you take a dump yourself, right? So it's really like all about like depending on yourself, learning to understand the philosophy, the teachings behind this religion, and then taking it and then learning like to be strong, to take responsibility for your own actions, and then to be brave and like face its consequence, right? Because the idea of karma is a very strong like tenet of Buddhism. So yeah, like that, why study Buddhism? Because it gives you a lot of practical advice about how to live your life. And well, I mean, this is going into a tangent, but one of the Four Noble Truths is that like there's a way to get to like just to summarize, like part of what the Buddha saw with regards to the nature of reality is all of life is suffering, right? And he said like, wait, we can end this suffering too. And one of the ways that we can end this suffering is by walking down following the Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path is basically a guideline on how you can actually achieve enlightenment, right? So it's like practical advice, because beforehand, like during the Buddha's time, there was only two extremes. You either didn't adhere to religion at all, and you just pursued the pleasures of life, the sensuous parts of life, right? And you didn't take note of any religion or any teaching. Or you followed religion so much so that like you became, you like lived in the jungle or the forest, you didn't eat anything, you began to like self-mortify your body so that you were skinny and like, it was like a life of asceticism. And he said, listen, one of two of these extremes doesn't have to be. There's a middle path. And he called it like, the middle path itself is I messed up. It's the Eightfold Path, right? It's like, all the things that you should be doing right. Right thinking, right meditating, right concentration, right livelihood, etc. And so those are just practical advices. Okay, and here's the last thing, the last reason why you should study Buddhism, right? The Buddhist practice, the Buddhist duty is to practice what it preaches, okay? So like living a good life and living the right type of life where like you're not doing harm onto other people. But we also study Buddhism so that you can teach it to other people, right? Because ultimately it becomes part of your identity. And so like, this is like a meta moment where it's like, hey, here I am, but I'm teaching you guys a little bit about Buddhism because, people can only get better when we share this teaching. And you can only really share the teaching of Buddhism if you studied it. So hence why you guys are here sitting here listening to me, because I'm studying it and then I'm showing it to you guys to study it as well. So that's the end of this lecture. So thank you for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me in the back or something. Thank you. Bye.